Welcome to Connie Palmer Sewing. Today I'd like to show you how to pleat a bishop without sewing the seams up first. And it's not hard to do. It takes a little more time than sewing your bishop together first, but what you don't have to worry about is getting the seams to go through the pleater correctly without them showing. So I like to do this, and I want you to know how to do it. So I'm going to start pleating on the back, and you have to then pleat them in order. You know, your back, your sleeve, then your front, then your sleeve, then your back again. So I'll get it started here. And I pleat a little differently than some people because I pleat from the back. I like to watch it go through. That is really immaterial. It's however you pleat, that's what you're going to do. And we were missing a dowel, so we've made an adaptation, but that's okay. Sometimes you have to drop back 5 and punt, right? Okay, so now I'm going to start pulling it off of the needles onto the thread. And what I'd like you to remember is, as you're pulling it off, pull it off straight so they all line up together, so they're not all wiggly wobbly. Because a lot of times, if you take them off and they're all wobbly, they press into place and it's hard to get those wobbles out. Okay, so this one is almost done. Because remember, it's just our back. I'll take this out now. It's just our back. So we're going to take the back completely off of the needles. Just slide it all the way off. I'm not going to cut the threads, but we're actually going to take these threads all the way off. Now, the other thing that we have to do, and I usually do this with a big needle, one that has a big eye, not the pointy end of it. But we want to remove some of the threads that are in the fabric so that our seam allowance will go to the back. So we're just going to start here. Actually, I'm going to start here. We're going to pull them out. So that we at least have 1/4 of an inch to do our seam allowance. So now we have those pulled out. We have our seam allowance there. Now I'm going to take our sleeve and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm not going to thread the threads yet. I'm going to thread the threads as soon as we get this one started and remove the seam allowance on the sleeve. This is a real pretty fabric. It'd be cute for Valentine's Day. And I just did that. So now I'm going to slide the back in. So I want to make sure I line it up with the same needles. And we're going to pleat just a small amount of the sleeve, because as we come onto the sleeve, we have to make a seam allowance on this part of the sleeve. So we're going to just take our fabric and just pop it off of the end of the needle. See? Try to get it all on the same row. That's the best thing. I'm just popping it off. Don't want to get too carried away. Okay, so now we have that seam allowance. So now what I have to do is rethread the threads. And I'll let you watch me do this. Now, a lot of people use a needle threader. You can use a needle threader. It's just, you know, after 50 years of using needle threader, I've broken a lot of needle threaders. So now I just thread it. But you do whatever you need to do to thread. And it doesn't matter if you thread from the bottom up or the top down. It makes no difference. Just easier for me to do this. I think we're creatures of habit, right? And I just say, whatever's easiest for you, that's what you're going to do. So I'm only going to do one seam, and then I'll finish this so you can see me pull this one off so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. And then I'll take a break and I'll finish pleating it, and then I will come back and we'll see how to sew the seams up and get it tied off. So we'll have it all on here, just not all at one time. I didn't want you to have to sit through this process too many times. That'd be a little boring. You can keep re-watching how to do this one seam because it's exactly the same all the way. You remove it, remove the seam allowance, pull the next piece off just a tiny bit to have the seam allowance, and then you rethread the thread so it's the same each and every time. And I usually use quilting thread, but I'll tell you, I do always soak my bobbins. If I have bobbins or if I have thread, I soak them in water because quilting thread has like a glaze on it. So once you wet it and let it dry, then it sticks to the spool or sticks to the bobbin. And then you don't have your thread winding off, which is so annoying. Now we're just gonna continue pleating. It's kind of like a science project, really. Once I throw all the bobbins in a glass, I usually just put them in a glass of water. Once they sink to the bottom, they're done. You can let them dry on a towel. I always call it my science project. But I'll tell you, it really makes a difference without having those threads spin off. I'm sure you've never had that happen. Okay, now remember this is the end, so this gets pulled completely off. You see, you can't even see where the seam is. You can't even see where the seam would be at all. There's nothing there. And then on the back, you'll see your seam allowance, and that's what we'll sew up. That's what I'll sew all those up. But we'll do that after I'll finish this, and then I'll come back. Okay, now we're ready to finish off those seams that were on the wrong side. And you can do it a couple of ways. One, you can make a little mock French seam. I'll show you how to do that. Or you can trim it close and zigzag it so that you have a small seam, which usually is what I do because that's just me. So to do the little mock French seam, let me flip this over. I trimmed off, you can see I've trimmed off one one side of the seam allowance to about 1/8 of an inch, and I left this sticking out here. Now, some of you are gonna like this and some of you won't. It's just however you wanna do it. You could press it real good. You wanna press it so that the the big seam edge is even with the little seam edge. And you can press it, or you can use the sew line glue pen. Just put a little bit of glue on here and smash it over. And I use the sew line glue pen all the time. It dries very quickly, and it doesn't leave any residue on your needle. It's not bad for your machine, all that kind of stuff. So now I have one part done. Now we have to take the rest of the seam, the fold, all the way over to the seam. And I do the same thing again. And again, you can press it. You can hand stitch it for sure if you wanted to. Hand baste it and then hand stitch it down. You know, there's a ton of ways that you can do it. And they're all right. Nothing's wrong. So I'll get this mashed down. Need just a little bit more glue here. I'm never afraid to use the glue, so doesn't bother me a bit. Just because I know it's good glue. The sew line glue pen by. Okay. And then you can press that, and it even makes it stick even more. And then just use a straight stitch and sew very close to this inside fold line, and you have that little mock French seam. So it's very nice. You can see it just blends right in. Let me tighten this up a little bit so you can see. I love to do bishops, so see how it just sticks right out here and doesn't show on the other side. It's really a miracle. Now, if you want to do the second version, which is trim it down, now you're going to trim down both sides of the seam allowance to about 1/8 of an inch, and then just set your zigzag so that it'll zigzag. Let me get my scissors here. Pointer from the straight stitch off the edge of the fabric. So you want to make sure that you're always going off the edge so that it'll kind of roll and whip the edge over. Now it'll roll and whip. When I say roll and whip, everybody thinks it's be nice and straight. It'll be straight, nice and straight on the straight area. But when you're rolling and whipping and you end up on this curve, you're on the bias, it won't look as pretty as it does right here, and that's just the nature of the beast because now you're on the bias. So that's how you finish off those seams, and I'll do another video on how to tie off the bishop.